Hey guys, welcome back to Suburban Ranch. Today we're working on our 1990 GMC K1500, and in our last video we replaced the rag joint on our steering shaft. But before we put the steering shaft back in, we want to address one other issue, which is the lower steering column bearing. So we noticed quite a bit of play in that steering column bearing when we removed the steering shaft. And so in today's video we're going to show you what that looks like, and we're going to show you how to replace that bearing. Here we are under the hood of the truck on the driver's side. We already have the steering shaft removed. So here's the bottom of the steering column as it comes through the firewall. And I'll show you guys what led me to believe that this bearing needs to be replaced. So if we just grab the bottom of this steering column, we can see quite a bit of movement, both up and down and left and right in that steering column at the bottom here. So there's a bearing just under this metal cover that we're going to replace today. So the first step is you see this snap ring. So we'll pry that snap ring off, and then this metal cover should come off, and we should have access to that bearing. There's the snap ring. And there's our metal cover. Here we have the plastic housing, so we just slid that off of the column. Here we have the old steering column bearing on the left and the new steering column bearing on the right. And I think I'm misspeaking when I say that the old one is a bearing. When you really look at it, it's actually just a plastic bushing. And so I ordered this new kit from the guys over at steeringcolumnservices.com. And they did mention that right around the 1990 time frame, GM had switched from a real actual lower bearing to just this cheaper plastic bushing. So we're going to replace it with the actual bearing. So basically the kit is the same, the snap ring's the same, the cover plate here is the same, but we're going to be replacing this just plastic bushing with an actual bearing. So you can see that's a little roller bearing in there, and this bearing snaps into the bottom of this plastic carrier piece here. So basically these two pieces will replace this one simpler and likely less robust plastic bushing. So we went to install this new lower column bearing, and we ran into a little bit of a problem. So this is the first bearing that we received from steeringcolumnservices.com, and it's been inserted into that bearing housing, that plastic bearing housing. And you can see how loose the fit is there between the bearing and the housing. So basically there's no way the bearing will even ever turn. It's just going to spin in the housing itself. It's just a terrible fit. So I talked to the guys over at Steering Column Services, and they said every once in a while they get one of these plastic bearing housings that maybe cooled too fast during the manufacturing process and ends up to having just really too large of tolerances. So they sent us another one. So here's another bearing and housing, and we can see here, you know, I'm actually putting quite a bit of pressure on there. There is just no movement at all. So he said this one was so tight he had to actually insert the bearing into the bearing retainer here, this plastic housing with a vise. And so here you can see the bearing itself actually spins. So we're seeing the bearing spin. It's not spinning in that housing. And so this is the one we're actually going to install in the truck itself. I've applied a little bit of grease to the steering shaft here to hopefully help this bearing slide on. So we'll see if we can slip it on. So I'm going to use just a block of wood and place it right over the end here and just tap it on. Okay, so now we're flush with the end of the steering shaft itself. I've got an 1 5/16, and you can see that fits almost perfectly on the bearing there. I'm just going to give it a few really light taps here. There we go. Okay, so we've just got to line up the appropriate cutouts on the bottom of the steering column here. Looks like that's it right there. Okay, that looks almost perfect. We'll put our retaining cover over the top. We'll line up the cutouts that the snap ring will go into. And then finally put our snap ring back on. As you just saw, we installed the new lower steering column bearing. And I can tell you, just for comparison's sake, I'll do that same shaking that I did at the beginning of the video. And there is basically no movement at all in the lower steering column bearing at this point. So I think this is going to be a huge improvement, help with our steering as well, our steering sloppiness. If you enjoyed this content, please do subscribe.